let's talk about using assemblies and namespaces. We know that an assembly is going to be your binary file, your exe or DLL. An assembly is a fundamental unit of physical coding group. So this is going to be that physical thing, the binary file. A namespace, on the other hand, is a fundamental unit of logical code group. This is going to be your code that you work with, your logic. So we're going to go into the details of both of these and explain the differences, because they are different, but they're similar in many, many ways. Now, all types in the .NET framework are going to live within assemblies. The CLR actually is not going to support anything outside of assemblies. So that common language runtime, this doesn't support types outside of assemblies. We have to keep that in mind. Each of our assemblies is going to be that exe or DLL, that we know. Assemblies are the fundamental unit for our .NET needs. So if namespaces are the logical code, assemblies are going to be the programs what we are going to be using. And there are fundamental things that we need to know about that in regards to security, for example. And security is going to deal with the permissions that are going to be requested and granted, as well as the level of trust that you have and the identity that you have for your particular programs and your assemblies and your execution, for example. Type identity is going to allow the assemblies to distinguish between the different naming conventions within those assemblies, so they can identify the types there, different types, as you'll see when we work with namespaces. Reference scope here. This is going to reference the types and resources inside this assembly and know about the other assemblies that are outside of this assembly that it needs to reference as well. Versioning controls the versioning to make sure that you're working with the right version and you don't have anything that's going to lead to you stepping on your code library toes or your assembly toes or somebody else's work. So that helps you. And deployment is going to make it very easy to deploy our assemblies. For the most part, you can just X-copy them as you need to. Each assembly is going to contain an assembly manifest. It might not be so obvious, but this manifest is a set of metadata that's going to be within your assembly, within your particular program, and it's going to give metadata information about it, as we're going to see when we work with the assembly information that we have in our programs, in the global assembly cache video in particular. So now assemblies can either be private or shared. Every computer with .NET on it has a global assembly cache. This is going to be for shared assemblies. Private assemblies are different. We'll see that and the differences between the two. Now, namespaces. Now, these aren't replacing assemblies, but these namespaces, that's the logical code. That's how you organize your code that's going to complement assemblies. An assembly can have a namespace that's going to organize classes. It can have multiple namespaces. Now, we've worked with many of the .NET framework namespaces in assemblies, so we know the differences between the two. So this is just pulling everything together. You're going to use the fully qualified name of a class. This is when you create the names as you concatenate things together. And this is going to allow us to distinguish between different namespaces and classes that might have the same names. So ambiguous names are taken care of and they're easily resolved because we can put that qualifier, that fully qualified namespace, as we've seen with namespaces and classes and even methods. So you don't need a namespace for small examples. I use namespaces throughout, but you don't necessarily even need to specify a namespace there. But you should create a namespace for larger projects and commercial applications. But you can create it in just about any case. But that's pretty much the high level of namespaces. Let's continue as we work more into the examples in this section.